A warm welcome to all participants of this webinar presented by the Philippine Association of Private Schools, Colleges and Universities, or PAP School, under the Private Education Assistance Committee's Assistance to Programs and Initiatives to Reform Education, or ASPIRE program, in cooperation with Estrada and Aquino Law, Rex Academy, and RACSO. Our first speaker, who will discuss the topic, Preserving the Complementary Role of Private Education in Policymaking, has become a legal luminary in education law, joining an exclusive group of lawyers who immersed and helped shape the legal environment of education. He is a regular resource person of the Senate and Congressional Committees in Education, especially at this time when we are asserting how the government can help sustain the lives of private educational institutions in a time of crisis. He also represents private education in policy consultations in the Department of Education, Commission on Higher Education, and Technical Education and Skills Development Authority. Aside from being the Managing Director of the Coordinating Council of Private Educational Associations, or COCOPEA, the umbrella organization of over 2,000 member private educational institutions in the country, he continues to champion causes that lead to achieving the goals of quality, relevant, and sustainable education. His much celebrated book, The Education Act, published by Rex Bookstore in 2019, is considered as the most relevant and up-to-date resource material for understanding the legal landscape of education in the Philippines. We are honored to have with us today our distinguished speaker, Attorney Joseph Noel Era M. Estrada.
Good morning, everyone. Lawyers are advocates for their clients. We litigate for our clients at the judicial branch of the government. When I started practicing my law profession, I learned that under our judicial system, each case, each party is important and resolved on the basis of applicable laws, facts presented, and evidence. While I am fortunate to have established my litigation practice with our firm at the Estrada and Aquino Law Company, I am also blessed to have been introduced in a legal practice, not at the judicial branch of the government, but at a co-equal branch, which is the legislature. Co-equal, equally powerful branch, which is the legislative department. In this branch of government, issues are resolved too, but not in each particular case, but in many ways by the millions of people affected. Issues affecting the general public or a distinct sector. It is broader in scope, and sometimes bills and legislation can be so powerful and may affect the lives of many people, including their future. In my case, I was thrust into public policy advocacy, particularly on the role of private education. This morning, I'll share with you nuances how education policy is shaped in my own personal journey as the lawyer and managing director of the Coordinating Council of Private Educational Associations, the largest group of private educational institutions in the country. As we try to move the guideposts in the policy landscape to allow private education fulfill its mission, its complementary role in the delivery of education. Education is perhaps the most important function of the state. This function is realized through the schools, whether it be in public, private, or even religious schools. The cost of delivering basic education, the cost of delivering education to 30 million Filipino learners and students from kindergarten all the way up to college is high that even the government cannot afford in its entirety. Nevertheless, the state is mandated by the Constitution to protect and promote the right of all citizens to accessible and quality education at all levels. Accessible education is a shared responsibility among the parents, government, and the private sector. But even as the state recognizes the complementary roles between the public and the private schools, this principle is not operationalized consistently, and therefore it needs strengthening. It needs to be strengthened. Early this year, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian passed a resolution at the Senate. A Senate resolution directing the appropriate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on strengthening the complementary roles of the public and the private institutions in the Philippine educational system, and formulating a framework to operationalize the principle of complementarity to achieve national objectives and sustainable development goals. And last March 5, a public hearing was held on this resolution number 302. It was participated by education leaders both in the public and the private education systems. And the key takeaway is that we need to legislate complementarity as laid down by our Constitution. While the private and religious schools share in the responsibility of the government to deliver education, it should be able to thrive and maintain its distinctiveness as non-government, non-public schools. Over decades, the private schools have been fighting legislative measures and administrative issuances that control them like the public schools. And I have seen them all as a lawyer in the field of education. For example, a parent enrolls a child in a private school and avails of its installment plan, reneges on the obligation, and insists as a matter of right to stay in the private school and be allowed to take the examinations. Even after several promissory notes unreturned and failed promises and compromises given by the private school, the parent continues to abuse the school's kindness and even threatens the school of a case if not allowed. As you may know, a bill in Congress and Senate is pending. And this bill is the act prohibiting a no permit, no exam policy in the private school. The bill makes it unlawful for a private school to refuse examination on account of unpaid tuition. Under the Manual of Regulations for Private Schools, or Department Order 88, Series of 2010, the school has the right to withhold transfer credentials of a student who has unpaid and outstanding financial accountabilities. Yet, many students are able to transfer with ease to public schools and private schools without these transfer credentials. As you may know, schools are generally funded by the parents through tuition payments, and policies like this affect their viability, especially the smaller ones. Recently, the Land Bank created a loan program for schools so that it may reloan the proceeds to parents who have outstanding balance in the school. But instead of lending to the parents directly, the school is being used as a conduit by the bank to absorb the risk of non-payment. Many private schools do not find this acceptable. But for some, because of dire necessity, they may still avail of this loan program even without the guarantee of repayment by the parents. It is really unfortunate. Private schools are generally funded by tuition payments of the parents. Private schools are therefore sensitive when it comes to tuition, that if they price it too high, the parents won't be able to afford sending their children, and eventually the schools lose enrollment. There is self-regulation here in place. But while the government needs to protect the parents from exorbitant tuition charges through reasonable regulations, these regulations must be reasonable to allow also the private schools the legitimate source of income to fund its operations. Private schools need to be protected too against some unscrupulous students who abuse the school's trust, generosity, and accommodation. Now, let's go to regulatory threats to private education. We live in a litigious society. Parents and students now are prone to complaints. They complain a lot. Complaints against private schools are brought into the legal system, to the traditional media, to social media. And because of public pressure, our Department of Education and CHED are sometimes forced to adjudicate on the rights of students like they are courts of law. In many instances, these agencies are compelled to determine how much of the government control and supervision that applies to government schools should also apply to private schools and to private universities. The key takeaway on this matter is extant in a long line of cases decided by the Supreme Court on reasonable regulation and supervision principle of educational institutions. But I'd like to share the most recent case, the case of Pimentel versus Legal Education Board decided by the Supreme Court last year, where the Supreme Court explained that what is meant by supervisory powers of the state over educational institutions. It is said that when the Constitution gives state supervisory power, it is understood that what the state enjoys is supportive power. That is the power of oversight over all educational institutions. It includes the authority to check, but not to interfere. It further explained that starkly withheld from the state is the power to control educational institutions. Consequently, in no way should supervision and regulation be equated to state control. Furthermore, the Supreme Court said that when the Constitution speaks of state supervision and regulation, it refers to the external governance of educational institutions. External governance, not internal governance, which is reserved to the boards of the private education institutions and their administrative officials. Reasonable supervision and regulation refers only to the power of the state to provide regulations to see to it that these regulations are duly followed and implemented. It does not include the right to manage, dictate, overrule, and prohibit. And so therefore, it does not include the right to dominate. Reasonable regulation and supervision also mean recognizing the contractual relationship between the students and parents on one hand and the schools and its administrative officials on the other. While these contractual relationships should not go beyond government scrutiny and regulation, regulations should be reasonable and not one that impairs obligations and valid contracts. These agreements are found in the school's handbook and other institutional policies for students and its school personnel. And for as long as there is fundamental fairness observed in the private schools, in the implementation of these policies, and there is this color of due process or modicum of due process, government intervention should be sparingly exercised. In fact, the Supreme Court said that academic issues are beyond review, even by courts of law. Let's go to funding support. As to government support, our country is guided by the principle under government auditing rules that government money shall be used solely for public purposes. In the past, this rule has unduly prohibited many legitimate funding of education programs in the private sector. Even when private schools qualify for government funding support, its implementation was hindered by the implementers' belief that it violates the principle that no government money shall be used for private purposes. With all due respect, the adherence to this principle is misplaced and not entirely accurate. Education remains a public good and a public function, even when it is delivered in the private sector. Thus, when the private schools qualify to implement a government subsidy program for its students, it can receive government appropriation in accordance with law. Using this principle, the students in the private tertiary education institutions were included in the bill that eventually became Republic Act 10931, or the Universal Access to Quality Tertiary Education Act, particularly the tertiary education subsidy given to college students in the private colleges and universities. Private education as a public good is also the same principle used for the ESC under the GASTPE and senior high vouchers under the K-12 law. As an aside, in the United States, in the case of Trinity Lutheran versus Comer in 2017, non-establishment clause of religious organization, a long-standing limitation on government and private sector interaction, now permits government resources on religious schools premises. Religious organizations who were previously disqualified from government funding in the belief that this will offend the principle of separation of church and state are now allowed state funding for as long as they qualify for the grant. This case carries a lot of weight on how here in the Philippines we should look into government funding of public good initiatives, particularly on education. It is the use that determines the public good, not the nature of the organization that implements it. Now, let's go to the Arise bill passed in Congress and the Bayanihan 2.0 passed in second reading at the Senate. Private education is one of the critically affected sectors of COVID-19 pandemic, and aside from urgent policy needs, COCOPEA continues to push for urgent economic intervention of the government. The education community is badly hit by the economic downturn. Our parents lost their jobs. Students are unable to pay their tuition last year. Schools are closing down operations. School personnel are being laid off. In line with these efforts to pump life back to our sector, COCOPEA worked with legislators on the economic stimulus package bill in Congress to expand specifically existing government subsidy programs for students, such as the TES, ESC, and senior high vouchers, to reach out to more students who continue to suffer from financial constraints and now at the verge of skipping the coming school year, and they also consider transferring to the public school system. This massive migration to the public schools will definitely unduly strain our government resources, and we need to help as a sector. COCOPEA pushed for the inclusion also of the school personnel in the wage subsidy programs, also included in the same bill. Our school personnel were not included in the government wage subsidies under the Department of Labor and Employment, CAMP, and also under the DOF's Small Business Wage Subsidy Program. And this is part of the economic stimulus package bill that we are also supporting. And similar inclusions were pushed through the extension of the Bayanihan, or the Bayanihan 2.0. And this is through the bill supported by COCOPEA, filed by Senator Ralph Recto. In Congress, this bill, the economic stimulus package bill, is called ARISE, or the Accelerated Recovery and Investment Stimulus for the Economy. The bill is co-authored by Congresswoman Stella Kimbo and Congressman Joey Salceda, under the leadership of Congresswoman Sharon Guerin as the chair of the House Economic Affairs. The House of Representatives approved on third and final reading the ARISE bill, but unfortunately there was not enough time at the Senate to pass its own version of the economic stimulus bill. Senate and Congress adjourned sine die and will open on the second session or open the second session of the 18th Congress in July. We continue to push for the passage of these bills until Congress resumes. We hope to get the needed funding support at this critical time for private education. Because prior to the pandemic, the private schools also helped government or have been helping the government fund many government initiatives on education using its own private resources. These government assistance programs mandate private education's participation and compliance, but again, using its own private resources without government funding support. Father Joel Tabora, president of the Ateneo de Davao University, refers to this as unfunded mandates. Some examples of unfunded mandates include the implementation of PD 577, which is a good law, which provides that bona fide dependents of members of the AFP who perish in battle shall be exempt from payment of tuition and other matriculation fees in both public and private colleges, schools, and universities. And yet, the law did not provide a subsidy for its implementation in the private schools. The training of teachers for example, the K-12 curriculum, new laws like anti-bullying policy, and others. When the private school teachers participate in government-sponsored trainings, they were asked to pay, unlike their public school counterparts. Speaking of teachers, recently the salaries of the public school teachers were increased or have been increased. The question is, what about the private school teachers? Not all private schools can afford the same increase in their pay. In creating an artificial raising of teachers' pay in the public schools through the law, and by making the difference considerably high, the primary consideration for teaching is unduly focused on who pays higher. This has caused drastic movement and migration of teachers from private schools to the government educational institutions. Way back in 2016, I personally pushed for a bill for government to subsidize salaries of private school teachers and make them at par with their public school counterparts. Because after all, they are all mandated to teach the core curriculum prescribed by our education agencies. The impassioned debate against public funding of private school teachers is centered mainly on academic elitism and surprisingly based on religious grounds. However, it is also worth considering that when private schools provide education services, it eases the government burden of hiring more teachers and training them in the public schools. Private school teachers should therefore be compensated for performing a public function in the form of salary subsidies. This bill that I actually pushed was filed as Teachers Compensation and Support Act in 2018 by Senator Bam Aquino, Senate Bill 2057, or an act enhancing the compensation structure and system of support for all teachers in basic education, and creating the Teacher Education Assistance Fund. Again, it was filed October 18, 2018. In the last Congress, or 17th Congress. This is a bill that recognizes the complementary role of public and private school teachers in the delivery of education. The essential features of this bill include the following provisions. First is the development of quality standards for the review and authorization of the adjustment of the public school teachers' salaries in order to shield it against politics in pulling out whatever number for the increase in their salaries. The implementation of more reasonable working conditions for the public school teachers. The right to be free from compulsory administrative assignments outside of their teaching duties stated in their contracts, unless, of course, they are given just compensation. free legal assistance, free counseling services, and an education subsidy for qualified and financially disadvantaged teachers who want to pursue further education or postgraduate education. And also, more stringent measures on transfers to and from the public and the private schools to make sure that there will be less disruption in the school year for the students. In the declining teaching profession, adopting a higher salary is not always key to encourage more teachers to join the force. It is also important to create for them a positive and supportive environment. It's not always about compensation. More significantly, the bill provides the salaries of all licensed and professional teachers in participating private education institutions shall be included in the government's annual budget for education, subject to the same position classification and compensation scheme by the Department of Budget and Management for teachers in the public schools under the salary standardization law, subject to eligibilities and requirements as provided in the bill. In short, the government will subsidize the gap between the salary of the teachers in the public schools and salary of the teachers in the public school system. I believe that in alleviating the plight of teachers, there should be no dichotomy. All teachers from public and the private schools deserve government support. We are now in an era where the regulation is a popular mantra. Regulation should be in the sense on how the framers of our Constitution has envisioned it. Supportive power, not one that prohibits or obstructs, but again, one that supports. If the government can remove the unnecessary regulatory and legal barriers to allow more complementary participation of the private schools, especially now more than ever, we will be at par with our ASEAN neighbors in providing quality and accessible education for our Filipino youth. Now I take this opportunity to appeal to our legislators today to look at private schools as partners of the government in the delivery of quality education. The private education sector needs champions to look at legislating a comprehensive education reform where public and private education complement each other in the delivery of accessible quality education. To my dear educators and colleagues this morning, if even just one of you decides to join me to commit to education advocacy after this webinar, then I have done my job this morning. Thank you very much and good morning to all of you. Maraming salamat po.
Our second speaker, who will focus on the topic, Strengthening Public-Private Partnerships in Education, is the Executive Director of the Private Education Assistance Committee, or PEAC, the Trustee of the Fund for Assistance to Private Education, or FAPE. Formerly, she was the Executive Director of the Catholic Educational Association of the Philippines, or CEAP. She was an accomplished educator and educational leader at St. Scholastica's College and the Manila Science High School, a top-notch graduate of the BS Physics for Teachers program of the Philippine Normal University in consortium with De La Salle University. She was also a recipient of a Department of Science and Technology scholarship grant. She finished her Master in Education major in Physics from De La Salle University and is presently pursuing her PhD in Education, major in Educational Leadership and Management Executive Program, also from De La Salle. She recently completed an executive course for education policy from the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at the National University of Singapore. We are honored to have with us today our esteemed resource person, Ms. Rodora Angela Doris F. Ferrer.
Okay, magandang umaga po ulit sa inyong lahat. Lalong-lalo na kay Atty. Estrada. Marami sa mga sinabi ni Era, baka ulitin ko din. But I just would like to give as a background. When Erap and I were planning this webinar, we thought that we wanted to ensure that despite the lockdown, we can continually touch base with everyone, especially in light of the continuing work of ensuring the private schools in the country find themselves their rightful place in the scheme of things. When the lockdown started in mid-March, we were in the middle of discussions on how the operationalization of complementarity can be legislated and how to improve the implementation of GASTPE and TES so that these programs fulfill what we envision in terms of access to quality education for our students in basic education and higher education. PAC has developed the certification instruments for senior high school voucher program providers and has studied the UAQTE Act to propose, among others, schemes to ensure choice among the students and at the same time incentivize the students to choose quality institutions. But COVID happened and we had to rework a lot of our processes and new initiatives had to be put on hold as the current practices, policies, and programs had to be reviewed and reconfigured. At the same time, we knew that we should not waste a crisis. Thus, we say, with this crisis is an opportunity to move the guideposts. Private schools should not just survive the crisis, but actually thrive because they could leverage on the strength of private entities, agility, efficiency, and innovation. The outline of my presentation shall start with the role of private schools in the education landscape. Of course, we're all very familiar with this, but as education advocates, we just would like to articulate this so that it is very clear where we are coming from when we talk about complementarity between public and private schools. PAC as a private entity, I'd like to discuss that with you as well. And then strengthening GASTPE and TES through policy recommendations and exploring other PPPs, such as what Atty. Estrada was discussing earlier, which is the Teacher Compensation and Support Act, which we think is something that teachers actually need. Even if they're not participating in any GASTPE program, they actually deserve government support. So I'd like to move to the next slide on the role of private schools in the education landscape and provide you with the data in terms of our share in the enrollment across the different levels. At the elementary level, we can see that there's about 1.2 million private school students compared to 12 million students in the public schools. So we really are looking at a 9% share in enrollment at the elementary level. Now, this is very small, considering that government says that they have enough provision for public elementary, but we also know as a matter of fact, let us say in Manila and in Quezon City, that there are areas where public elementary schools are congested, such that we've always been talking about piloting education service contracting at the elementary level where there is congestion in public elementary schools. In junior high school, we have 1.4 million students, and that's a leap from private elementary. And that's because the share at 17% is because of education service contracting. We know that as a matter of fact, that because of ESC, we were able to migrate some public students from grade 6 moving to junior high school private, okay, because of education service contracting. Next slide. The K-12 law, next slide, started with senior high school, right? Previous slide. Senior high school data. In senior high school, we have 1.3 million students. And as compared to the public school which has 1.5, that is a share which is quite significant. And again, that can be attributed to the senior high school voucher program. Of course, at the higher education level, okay, the private school students account for about 1.6 million compared to about 1.8 million, right? At the higher ed level, okay, for higher ed institutions. But let us try to use this background of data for student share, enrollment share, number of schools, with why we are pushing for complementarity, and why we were so excited when we had the Senate hearing on operationalizing complementarity being legislated, okay, by this Congress. What are the attributes of private schools that work for the education landscape? Let's proceed to the next slide. By definition, private schools are those, next slide, that are dependent on user fees to cover all or part of their operational and development cost. They are managed largely independently of the state, and they are owned and or funded independently of the state. So that's how we define private schools. But what is it about private schools that that makes it advantageous for complementarity to be operationalized as articulated in the Constitution? Okay, next. Okay. Even if that definition of private schools was stated, we also know, as a matter of fact, that government still interacts with the private schools. Now, even if there's independence, we all know that there is a state curriculum. We also know that private schools will have to go to, say, the Department of Education in order to be given recognition. So all of this tells us that there definitely is interaction between the state or the government and the private schools. But in the Philippines, next slide, what is noteworthy is that the first schools in the Philippines were historically private schools. I think this is something that will have to be part of the thinking. The Islamic schools before 1521 and the Catholic schools after 1521 all predated the establishment of the public school system. So every time there's discussion about the role of private schools, we always say that when the state talks about and thinks about the agenda for Philippine education, they should always think that and know, as a matter of fact, that private schools predated the public school system in the country. Now, what are the unique attributes of private schools that deem their existence not only necessary but beneficial to society? Okay, next slide. Next slide. Three things, cost efficiency, competition, and complementarity. So what do we mean by cost efficiency? Next slide. It is very obvious. It is more cost efficient for the government to subsidize private schools than to construct and operate more public schools. A lot of ADB studies have actually stated the same conclusion, that students can almost immediately avail of and benefit from education services if the state contracts the private schools. So this is the model of education service contracting. Okay, next, competition is another, should I say, factor that works for private schools. But we don't mean competition as unhealthy competition. What we actually mean here is more student choice, and this is what underlies the voucher program. See, private school choice programs actually allow students to choose private schools and still receive government subsidy. This is also what underlies the voucher program when it was first implemented in school year 16-17. That while there is not enough provision of public senior high schools, we also wanted to emphasize that the students have a choice. And if they choose to go to a private provider, then they are eligible for government support. One of the central tenets of school choice, next slide, is that competition can lead to educational reform by spurring public schools to become more effective. So that is why we say that it is also to the advantage of public schools that there is competition in that sense. But of course, we always would like to go back to the fact that when private schools actually succeed in delivering quality education, we think of that as also a success of the state, because it is the state that regulates both public and private schools. And we always say that it's one education system with two drivers. What about complementarity? Okay, what do we mean by complementarity? Father Tabora, former president of CAP, defined complementarity as combining different things in such a way as to enhance or emphasize each other's qualities, supplying mutual needs or offsetting mutual lacks. So what do we mean by this? Next slide. The relationship between the two entities, that's public and private school, should be one that's collaborative or cooperative. It has to be mutually beneficial for both public and private schools, that they actually succeed and that they coexist. The existence of one should be for the purpose of enriching the other, not in competition, but in harmonious complementarity. Again, I'd like to go back to that discussion we had with Senator Win Gatchalian and in a Senate hearing last March 5, which really intended to legislate the operationalization of complementarity so that it is not a moving target. It is something that we actually understand what we mean by this, meaning if, for example, at junior high school, we have education service contracting, and that to us operationalizes complementarity. In senior high school, we have the voucher program, and that to us operationalizes complementarity. Then what's the entire roadmap for all of these subsidy programs? What about the K-6? What about at higher education? All of this should be part of the thinking when we say that we want to operationalize complementarity and really strengthen public-private partnerships in education in the Philippines. Okay, next slide. In complementarity, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. I think that's still coming from Father Joel when he made his presentation in 2014 on the concept of complementarity. Now I'd like to go to PAC as a private entity. This is another significant discussion which I'd like to focus on, because there always has been some discussion, next slide, on the Private Education Assistance Committee and its mandate of supporting private schools in the Philippines. Next slide, please. Next slide. We all know that PAC was created by Executive Order 156 in 1968 and amended by EO 150 in 1994 with the following composition: the Deputy Secretary as the chair, a representative from the NEDA or the chair of NEDA himself, and we have the president of CAP, the president of PACO, and the president of AXCO. And you can see that aside from being the trustee of the Fund for Assistance to Private Education, PAC also has auxiliary functions, allowing it to manage and administer grants, donations, bequests, gifts, and loans from the Philippine government. But why are we emphasizing this slide? And why are we talking about the history of PAC and underscoring the fact that it is a private entity? Next slide. The founding fathers of the Fund for Assistance to Private Education, as you can see, comprised of the Deputy Secretary, at that time the NEDA chair, and then the presidents of the three educational associations who actually lobbied for the Fund for Assistance to Private Education to be carved out from the war repatriation coming from the US government. Actually did not envision that PAC is a government entity. Okay, why am I into this discussion? First, we'd like to underscore in this slide that PAC actually predated GASTPE. In fact, ESC was piloted by PAC. So if there is that notion that PAC exists because of the GASTPE program, that is incorrect. The PAC was established as the trustee of the Fund for Assistance to Private Education 50 years ago. And because of its mandate to support private schools in the Philippines, piloted the Education Service Contracting program to solve congestion in public schools. And because of that, also lobbied for the legislation of GASTPE, later expanded into e-GASTPE, and then later on the voucher program as part of the K-12 law, And as of last year, tertiary education subsidy under UAQTE. All of these co-implementation functions all happened after PAC has established itself as the trustee of a fund for private schools and one that is committed to support the private schools in the Philippines. Next slide. The DOJ opinion in 1969 actually states this: the PAC is a private entity performing public functions. Now, in all the studies that have been done on ESG and the fact that there is cost efficiency when the state contracts the private schools, what is also said is that there is public-private partnership when government contracts PAC, which is a private entity. That is part of the strength of PPP in the implementation of the GASTPE programs. Government, such as the Department of Education, contracts PAC, a private entity, and that allows the co-implementation to be a lot faster, to be supported by private higher ed institutions, allows PAC to contract other private HEIs, contracts experts and resource persons from the private schools in the Philippines because of its private nature. Now, this is an ongoing discussion. As you can see, that this slide or the text in this slide were lifted from the position paper that we submitted to the Commission on Audit when there was a question about whether PAC was public or private. Our position remains that PAC is a private entity. And that was the intention of the government. That was the intention when the executive order was written. You know, as an aside, I always say this: we cannot in any way get volunteered services from private schools, such as the more than 300 trainers that we have for in-service training, the more than 80 certifiers who quality assure junior high providers, the more than 80 monitors who actually ensure compliance of private schools on GASTPE and TES. If this were not all part of the PAC community, so private supporting private. Okay. The third part of the presentation is on our proposals to strengthen the existing GASTPE programs and TES. For GASTPE, these are our recommendations. Next slide. First, the data. Okay, please look at this, and I think this is very useful. In school year 2019-2020, 1,079,153 of all junior high school students in the Philippines are ESC grantees. That is 76% of all junior high schools in the Philippines are receiving government subsidy. So it is also incorrect to say that government does not support students and teachers in private schools. They do support them. However, our call has always been to strengthen, to stabilize, to legislate, to make coherent our subsidy programs across levels: elementary, junior high, senior high, and higher ed. For voucher program, we have 1,287,641 grantees, and that is a high 95% of all senior high school students in the Philippines receiving support from government. This actually led to our recommendation that we should also be looking at the quality of the senior high providers, because we're using government funds to support senior high students in these institutions. Okay, next. Our recommendations, which we have submitted to DepEd for school year 2020-21, include the following. And a lot of you know this, a lot of you education advocates who are right now listening, we have a standing proposal for the teacher salary subsidy to increase to 24,000. This was increased about more than 3 years ago to 18,000, and we think that it's about time that it goes up to 24,000, knowing that the migration of teachers from public schools to private schools is continuing, if not worsening, and that because there are always calls for increases in the salaries of public school teachers. We also are calling for the extension of the teacher salary subsidy to senior high school teachers who are participating in the senior high school voucher program. I think we have enough legal basis for this. But you know what pains us is that there is no salary subsidy for teachers at the private elementary level. There is no salary subsidy for teachers who are not participating in any of the GASTPE programs. That is why we strongly support what was discussed earlier by Atty. Estrada, which was filed last Congress, and we hope we can have um, legislators who will take up our cause, the Teacher Compensation and Support Act for all private school teachers across levels. To us, our argument here is that education is a public good, and if it is the private schools that are delivering this public good, then they deserve government support. We also are calling on DepEd to release single billing, single payment, okay, the senior high school voucher payments for this year, 2020-2021. In fairness to DepEd, they've always wanted to do this because it is also more burdensome to release their voucher payments twice. No? But there always is a concern with funds for the voucher program, such that there is not enough to do single billing, single payment. But we still are proposing this because this year, when we all are reeling from the effects of COVID-19, the faster the subsidies are released to all private schools, then that becomes definitely more advantageous for all of us. Okay, next. We also have proposals for special provisions only for 2020-21. We are proposing that we allow GASTPE participating schools to recruit new ESC grantees at the higher grade levels, 8, 9, 10, and voucher recipients at grade 12, provided the school's admission requirements are observed. We're thinking that it's possible that parents of public school students might want to move their children to private schools because they think that the private schools are more ready, given that a lot of adjustments will have to be done, given the health and safety protocols and all the other operational challenges brought about by COVID-19, that the private schools are ready for this. So we are proposing this, and it is something that we have done after the Marawi siege. When the Marawi siege happened, PAC also proposed special provisions very similar to this, that schools in the area should be allowed to recruit ESC and voucher recipients at the upper grade levels. You know that the policy now is that ESC starts at grade 7 and voucher starts at grade 11. But for this year alone, we are seeking this special provision. We also are saying that all TSS grantees in the previous school year shall continue to receive the grant, provided they are still employed by their ESC participating schools. What do we mean by this? You know that there is a provision of 180-minute contact hours, right? And that's something that cannot be done, given that we will be using a lot of distance and remote learning. Some are doing online learning. So that 180-minute requirement, okay, will not be something that schools can comply or teachers can comply with. So we're actually proposing that all TSS grantees last year should continuously receive the grant, provided that they are still employed by their schools. Okay, next. For TES, or the Tertiary Education Subsidy under the Universal Access to Quality Tertiary Education Act, these are our this is the data for school year 2019-2020. And for all of you there who are listening in and are HEIs, you know that the processing is continuing. Some schools, about 200 schools, actually have not submitted their billing documents out of this 1,246. And we are appealing to these schools to please get your, upload your documents so that the billing can start and can move from the Regional Secretariat of PAC to the National Secretariat and to the UniFast National Secretariat. And that we also know, as a matter of fact, that UniFast and the Commission on Higher Education have been downloading the funds to the private higher ed institutions. Okay, but there are some recommendations that we'd like to make regarding the tertiary education subsidy. Some are really operational, while some will need some amendment. Okay, next slide. For example, we all know that being part of the listahanan, okay, is a requirement for grantees to be chosen as TES grantees. But we also are saying that this will have to be studied vis-a-vis the granting of TES to HEIs in cities or municipalities where there are no SUCs and LUCs, and that these students may not be included in the listahanan. Now, a lot of the queries that we have received about this is that the students are actually listed in the listahanan, but were out-ranked. Okay? So that is something that we'd like to study with the UniFast, that we should prioritize. Now, those students who are in the listahanan, we should revisit the provision regarding allowing that there is no prioritization of listahanan when the HEI is in a city or a municipality where there are no existing SUCs or LUCs, or probably adopt a proportional budget allocation, okay, to students who are in no SUC, no LUC HEIs, or those who are in cities or municipalities where there are SUCs and LUCs, but the students are in the listahanan. We also are proposing, next slide, the protection of existing TES beneficiaries for continuity. I think this already was a resolution of the UniFast board, but we also would like to say that while the UniFast has passed a resolution adopting a rule on prioritization to student grantees who are existing beneficiaries, we would like to ensure that there is no challenge to such policy, and we're suggesting that the same resolution be specifically included in the Universal Access to Quality Tertiary Education Act for more transparency and continuity of such policy. Of course, we're fully supportive of this. In fact, for school year 2020-2021, we're actually saying that when we start the billing for this, if we continue with this policy, then these students are continuing TES grantees upon enrollment are already considered billable grantees, no? Because they're continuing TES grantees. We also are looking at, next recommendation, the awarding of TES by application through a TES online portal. Now, right now, what is indicated in the implementing rules is that the application is through the school. Okay, this is something that we'd like to revisit, because we think that if we really want to push for choice, then the student should be able to apply to be TES grantees even prior to their choosing where to go. And that can only happen if we have an online portal that will process these applications. Okay, so these are all the things now that we wanted to discuss with UniFast or with members of Congress when we revisit the provisions and the implementing rules, and even operationally policies that were adopted and approved by the UniFast board. Okay, so I'd like to proceed now to my last agenda item, which is exploring other PPPs. But before that, wait, yes, I forgot I had this slide. For those who are participating in the GASTPE programs and TES, you also know, as a matter of fact, that we ask you to use the system in order to inform us when you are opening school year 2020-21. We wanted to actually plan our own orientation sessions with you, and we also wanted to peg when the start of billing would be, and these were the results that we have that we found. For junior high schools, 90% of all those who responded, 2,400 responded schools, said that they're opening in August, and about 68% of this 90% were opening 4th week of August. For senior high schools, about the same. 89% said they were opening in August, and that about 68% said they were opening 4th week of August. For higher ed institutions, we also have here 81% saying that they will open in August, and then about 48% said they will open 4th week of August. Of course, this is significant to PAC, both the national and the regional offices, because we'd like to know how the billing, the submission of billing documents will be done for school year 2020-21. Okay, the last thing that I'd like to discuss with you are other public-private partnerships, which I already have mentioned in passing. Okay, first, This was already mentioned by ERAP. No, we were in several meetings regarding a RISE, regarding Bayanihan 2.0. And we were looking for support for cash assistance for schools, teachers, and personnel in private schools. Where were we coming from? You remember that third week of April, PAC conducted a survey across the Philippines, and we were able to gather about 900 schools in all the regions, representing sectarian and non-sectarian schools. And we were asking them the state of their finances. So about 20% said they only had funds to pay for teachers and all operational costs end of until March. Another 20% said they had money until April. Another 20% said they had money until June. And about 40% said they only had money until May. So if you look at that data, you will see that there really is a problem with cash flow for our private schools in the Philippines. And the discussions that went back and forth as to were the teachers actually displaced, were the teachers asked to resign, we were saying that that was really all beside the point. What is very clear is that there is reduction in salaries given the delay in the school opening, which we all, of course, all completely understand. In fact, we know that some schools are now just cash assistance. They're not paying full salaries anymore. Some went resorted to no work, no pay. And even if you're being paid basic salaries, we also know that because the school year has not started and the school year will be extraordinary, then what you expect in terms of overtime, honorarium, all of this additional income which you had in the past would all not be available for school year 2020-21. So we're completely supportive of this, and the discussions are ongoing. And we've actually offered the billing systems of PAC to be utilized for this purpose in order to expedite the releases of any cash assistance that government will give to private schools, teachers, and personnel. Specifically, the teachers and the personnel. I also mentioned a while ago, next slide, on our support for the operationalization of complementarity, which was discussed last March 5, before the lockdown. This was the hearing where we found ourselves in, and when Cocopea, next slide, gave a very good presentation, next slide, to put in context why we think that it is, now is the right time, right, to talk about complementarity, seeing that there's a declining share of private education enrollment, over the years. Now, if this decline will continue, then definitely the quality of education will suffer because you will burden, the public school system. At the same time, you're not able to sustain the private schools. And this is nothing that you can, and sustainability is definitely crucial, because a private school that closes, it's not as if you can open that overnight. If a school already decides to close, then that will have a negative impact on the community that it serves. And a while ago, we were talking about cost efficiency, complementarity, student choice, all of this principles underlying why we think private schools should coexist in genuine complementarity with public schools. We also have a slide here coming from the Cocopea presentation about crowding out private education and negative consequences of such. So all of these were presented to the Senate Committee on Higher Education, on Basic Education, and we're willing to present this as well to the House Committee on Basic Education, because the same way that we submitted all our survey results to the House and the Senate in order to inform policy, in order to inform what amendments, what revisions, what should be done next in order for complementarity to be operationalized. The next slide is something that I've mentioned previously, the pilot of ESC at the elementary level for cities and municipalities that need to contract public school students to private elementary schools. I've had these discussions with the NCR regional director for the last several years, and it's something that we are very we really want to do, because definitely at the NCR, for example, where there is no buildable space, see, ESC the ESC provision in the GASTPE law disqualifies the elementary schools. So this is something that can be piloted, and then whatever the result of the pilot will be can be submitted to Congress so that it can be made part of our amendments to the GASTPE and to the e-GASTPE law. Okay, and then we still have one last slide, and this is something that we're discussing first time. We found out that there is a bill that was filed in the House on a Partnership in Basic Education Act. And going through the bill, we actually have several positions. We have several arguments against this Partnership in Basic Education Act, primarily because we were not even consulted. The PAC, COCOPEA were not consulted in a bill that seeks to support private schools, that seeks to legislate additional subsidy programs. There was no consultation. And to us, that is something that does not speak well of how legislation should proceed. At the same time, if you will look at the House bill that was filed, a lot of it is a duplication of subsidies that are already being implemented under GASTPE. It also is a duplication of what PAC is doing in co-implementing these programs. And at the same time, if you will look at the composition of the Partnership in Basic Education Board, we disqualified the educational associations such as COCOPEA and CAP, which, as you can see from my discussion historically, actually lobbied for a fund for assistance to private education, actually piloted education service contracting, lobbied for its legislation, and all of a sudden they're not part of this Partnership in Basic Education Board. So we strongly recommend to legislators that what we should really do is review e-GASTPE, strengthen what we have right now, operationalize complementarity, and focus on what private schools need the most. And one of this is really the Teachers Compensation and Support Act. Teachers' salary subsidies for all private school teachers. If that gets legislated, then we will be able to solve the migration. We will be able to stabilize our core of faculty in all private schools. Then we can be assured of quality delivery. You cannot deliver quality education if your faculty roster is unstable. And that is something that we and even the Department of Education actually recognizes. So as a final note, we see the phrase, the new normal, being thrown around. But I don't quite agree that this term should only pertain to life, to how life is in the midst of COVID-19. On the contrary, I like to believe that the new normal is what awaits us after all this. The new normal is the fruit of not letting this crisis go to waste, a version of society that is currently under construction. We have the opportunity now to move forward, redefine the norms, tear down systems that don't serve the common good, and this start with moving the guideposts. The work may be difficult, but our children, the education sector, and our nation's future are all worth the hard work. So thank you for listening. I hope the audio was clear. The third time I attempted, okay? And thank you, Atty. Estrada, and everyone listening in. Magandang umaga.
Our webinar moderator heads the Manila Times, one of the most highly respected national daily newspapers in the Philippines. The Times is a multi-awarded newspaper and is the oldest in the country, having been founded on October 11, 1898. Under our moderator's leadership, the Times has won numerous awards and citations, one of the latest of which was the Newspaper of the Year Award for 2016, given by the Volunteers Against Crime and Corruption, or VACC. Besides journalism, his interests include education and managerial economics. He has a worldly outlook, having lived in 3 countries and traveled to more than a dozen others in North America, Europe, and Asia. We are pleased to introduce today's moderator, Mr. Dante Francis Klink M. Ang II.
Morning, Doris. Good morning, Erap. Thank you for inviting me to moderate this event, and congratulations to both of you for putting this webinar together. We are being viewed by at least 2,000 people, at least on the PAYAC Facebook page, but this webinar is also being broadcast on other platforms, so we have much more than that. We are already receiving a number of questions, but let me exercise my moderator's prerogative to ask the first one, and that is, putting on my journalist hat for a minute. We have been, and others in media have been, reporting on the twin crisis that the Philippines and the rest of the world is experiencing now, and that is, of course, the health crisis and the economic fallout. But not much has been said, except today, about the education crisis, because it, of course, pertains not only to the financial distress of private institutions, but also to the future of our country. Can you guys speak a little bit about that? Because the health crisis is going to linger, and that's what epidemiologists are saying. And of course, the economic fallout is just now being addressed by government. What is the long-term impact on education by this from this pandemic? Doris, may we start with you?
I was about to say that ERAP should do the answer, because we were in several meetings and there was practically a private education sector wish list, right, that we submitted to the IATF to sustain private schools and to be supported by the state, realizing that education is an essential activity. So, Atty. Estrada, please discuss what we submitted.
Somebody should mute the. All right. Yeah. Thank you, Klink, for that question. We actually presented the private education urgent funding needs to different levels of government, and most especially to the House of Representatives in pushing for the economic recovery bill, or the one that gives the economic stimulus package. So we saw this as an opportunity to finally implement complementarity up to the level of that is envisioned by the Constitution. Prior to the pandemic, the private sector has been pushing for that. Now, of course, we have GASTPE, we have PAC, but it's been a long time since this law is revisited and the programs of assistance there are expanded. Like, for example, ESC, of course, is working, TSS, but these are not in the level of complementarity. So it's meant to be a stopgap measure. It gives a fixed amount to students for the whole year, gives a fixed amount to our teachers for the entire year. But this level of assistance is not yet complementarity. There's no parity. You can see naman the gap between the salary of the public school teachers, for example, and the salary in the private sector. So if we want to expand this is the time, because we now see the need of the school personnel affected by this pandemic. So we saw that opportunity to push for expansion of the subsidies under existing laws like the GASTPE and the K-12 law on the senior high school vouchers. And we are fortunate that the three congressmen that I mentioned, Congressman Joey Salceda, Congresswoman Sharon Garin, and Congresswoman Stella Kimbo, they were able to push for this. In fact, the bill was approved on third and final reading. Kaya lang kinapos ng oras because there's no version from the Senate. So we hope if that will be passed, it will not only be for this pandemic. It will of course roll over, even post-pandemic.
Okay, thank you both for that. As much as I like to ask a follow-up, there are already some questions being sent to us, and I think the first one like I noticed earlier was when Doris was presenting and had to do with the TSS. This question comes from Sarah Dange and was echoed by Emmanuel Cañadas. And I noticed there are a few other people asking similar questions. And that is, when will teachers receive their TSS?
Okay, thank you for asking. But even while I speak, no, the Department of Education is already processing no, the teacher salary subsidy releases. We just have to, of course, realize that at the height of the lockdown, or when the lockdown started, the Department of Education had to release the second tranche of the voucher payments first. And then the teacher salary subsidy had to be processed. And this was all happening while the Department of Education, PAC, and even Land Bank were working on using, skeletal forces. So that added to the delay, and the fact that there was also very little mobility for personnel. Even while we migrated processes to online submissions, there were still concerns. Like, as a matter of fact, here at PAC, we'd go to the bodega of LBC to get what you submitted that LBC cannot bring to us anymore. Okay, so all of this happened mid-March. TSS billing started in Feb. So talagang inabutan siya ng ganitong but we're trying our best. And in a webinar that I also had previously, I was saying, nahihiya man akong humingi ng inyong pasensya. Talagang pasensya talaga na ganito yung nangyari sa teacher salary subsidy. But for next year, you saw what we said, no? We wanted single billing, single payment for vouchers. But in the hearing that we had, no, that even DepEd was saying they don't have funds for that. That's why we appeal to members of Congress, no, that provide the funds so that it will be single billing, single payment. The second tranche of voucher payments is more burdensome for DepEd. If they only had the money, they'll process once and release it once, right? Because you have to do things twice. So that's really our call. In fact, even as of last year, that was already the call. Single billing, single payment for vouchers, the same with ESC. And then the teacher salary subsidy would be the only one left in Feb, okay, to process.
Thank you, Doris. There's another question here from Alison Rio. And the question is, there are some parents who are asking if ever that an SEC grantee will transfer to a public school this school year, 2020-21, then will return the following year, 2021-2022, to a FAPE accredited school. Is the learner still considered an ESC grantee?
Okay, the current provision says that you will be disqualified from ESC because it has to be a continuing grant, right? So if you are in an ESC school now, at grade 7, that's when they start, you should complete until grade 10. That of course, that's a principle of that grantee should be continuing so that we can, we can actually assess success of completion of grantees. Remember, these are government funds and we don't want any attrition or fallout among our grantees. If you move to a public school for this year and then go back to a private school, I think it's really not just the grant that's a problem. It's also the continuity of the learning, because definitely, when a private school implements a curriculum, it does not implement it, the way state actually provides, but that it adds to it, its own, its own framework, its own philosophy, vision, and goals, etc. So it's contextualized. But having said that, I also would like to emphasize this. I don't know if this is clear to everyone, that the ESC and the vouchers are two subsidy programs which are portable, which means if a student moves to another ESC school from one ESC school, the grant continues. This happened, for example, at the Marawi. The Marawi seats, the students left Marawi, moved elsewhere, but they're ESC, they're continuing. Now, the same with vouchers. If a school, or if the student is already a voucher grantee and you move residences, or in the extreme case that your school gets suspended, because of, say, unaccounted grantees or being below standard in the certification, it really does not punish the student because the student can move to another voucher participating or ESC participating school.
I see. What's been going on with the voucher program, at least for the second semester of the school year? Has there been any news from the ground about the interruption or disruptions being experienced by learners across the country?
For basic education, EROP can answer for higher ed. When we conducted the survey, the first question we asked was, what continuity of student learning outcomes? How were the students at the time of the lockdown, and are they ready to move to the next level? And the answer was a yes. So that was good news. That even when we went on lockdown, say mid-March, the schools were quite confident that what they had from June to that mid-March was sufficient to allow the student to move to the next level. So that to us was rather good news, right? But what came out in that survey was that the problem areas really were that they cannot do face-to-face, which means they will need a lot of help to make them, to familiarize them and allow them to implement the K-12 curriculum using, they were even hoping blended, but because there's no face-to-face, then it will really be distance or remote, whether offline or online. They were worried about internet connectivity. They were worried about devices. They were worried about the physical plant of the school not being ready in case the students will go back to school. But I said, why worry when the students will not go back to school yet? Because our delivery will be at this time, distance or remote. I mean, that's something that can still take a lot of months to plan. Okay, but having, as I said, the schools were saying that their students were ready to move to the next level. So right now, what PAC is doing is really conducting teacher training online. In fact, in-service training has also been migrated to online platforms in order to still reach the teachers. And last week, we just ran a junior high school training for all junior high school teachers or grades 4 to 10 teachers per content area. Hindi na to one size fits all kasi sayang yung 200 trainers natin nandiyan naman eh. So kung science, math, and it's capacitating the teachers to know how to implement a streamlined curriculum because the DepEd streamlined it using flexible learning modes. Now, all of which is whatever is possible in their school, online, distance or remote, which is offline.
Yeah, Attorney Estrada, you want to add to that?
Well, in higher education, we have this tertiary education subsidy program under the Universal Access to Quality Tertiary Education, RA 10931. It's the same concept, but not without using the vouchers. I think we're on the second year of implementation. And on that respect, we still have a lot of adjustments to do in perfecting the system. But we're very fortunate that for this year, or for the processing of the billings for last second semester of last school year, we already have the PAC with the Unifast to implement this. But they came in January of this year, and unfortunately, we had this ECQ by March. So medyo na-derail tayo because of the physical submissions and all. But I think it has been moving. The schools already received the TES for the students for the first semester, and only a few are still processing their billing payments. So I think this will also prepare us for the next school year, and hopefully wala na tayong masyadong problema. But the same concept, it's really the private sector also that pushed for that, for the inclusion of the students in the private colleges and universities in that bill. Remember, Klink, when this bill was originally proposed, it was a free tuition in state universities and colleges. The private sector was not included, but we lobbied again using the same principle of complementarity enshrined in our constitution. And at least that's a monumental bill, because for tertiary education, wala tayo for the longest time. We have GASTPE for basic ed, but for higher ed, wala. But again, since 2017, it has been passed into law. But now we have some problems with implementation, but I think we can resolve all of this.
Okay, thank you. I just want to, Doris, you want to add? Sorry.
I'd like to add, no, I think I failed to mention, we're waiting for DepEd to finally announce the opening of the senior high school voucher application. We actually thought it will happen this week. There was a letter of appeal that was submitted by PAC, the three educational association presidents, to DepEd to open the voucher application for non-ESC grade 10 so that they can be voucher recipients. Again, what we're seeing is this, we keep on lobbying for cash assistance for teachers and personnel and for the schools to be sustainable. But we have existing subsidy programs, legislated. So, and the implementation guidelines and the dissemination and the disbursement systems are in place. So if these are the ones you strengthen and ensure that there's funds for this and that this will be, that you can expedite all of this, that's already a lot of help. No, I really am for a rise. I'm really in favor of Bayanihan 2.0. But when all of this were being discussed, we also always emphasize simplify the guidelines, simplify and use current disbursement systems so that we can expedite. Because how can you be helping someone if your help is just too delayed? I mean, that's not anymore, right? I mean, ano ba yun? Aanhin pa yung damo kung patay na
yung kabayo.
Baka mali yung aking quotation, okay? Tapos, dun sa TES naman, even if there are problems now, I also submit naman that this is a very new subsidy program. It's new. We just started on board this year. Unlike ESC, which has matured, and then the vouchers, which is very simple and attached to ESC, the TES is a new animal. But over time, I think we can improve the implementation such that it will really move towards the direction we want, which is this: quality, access to quality tertiary education for those who deserve it the most. So we move it in that direction.
Thank you. Now we have people watching this as far north as Ilocos Norte and as far south as Zamboanga. But if I may remind the viewers, if they want to ask questions, I'm reading the comments from the PAYAC Facebook page website because I can only monitor so many screens. But there is one here from Abatay Ali. And the question is, I think the fund for TSS was realigned. Is this true? If DepEd can release the salaries in the public counterpart as early yung receipt nila, please be transparent. Hindi yung tinatago yung realignment. I guess the background to this, I don't know. Has there been any realignment of the subsidy funds? I suppose because of the amelioration or the need for amelioration program and other spending priorities because of the crisis. Have you guys heard of anything like that?
There was someone well, the TSS, I don't think it was realigned. Okay, I'm sure about the TSS. It's just that the billing started in Feb, and then we went on lockdown in mid-March. Okay, so yun. Now, we're being asked by DepEd now, should we have the billing for TSS earlier than Feb? Now, that's something that can be discussed. But why did we proceed to Feb previously? Because we wanted the schools to submit a list of their teachers who actually served for the entire school year so that they don't have to refund in case the teachers resign middle of the year. So in the past, when the TSS was processed as early as September and October, when a teacher resigns in Feb or January and Feb, the school has to refund, okay, because the teacher already left and already received TSS. So that's the thing that we were trying to avoid. Plus, we wanted to include those who will pass the LEP very recently, say November or December, so that they can already be included in the February billing. Those were the two reasons why we wanted a Feb billing. And if there were no complications such as COVID, we would be releasing TSS by April, because it's the only billing document left, right, to process for PAC. But this was extraordinary because of COVID-19. But I don't think there was any realignment for TSS. Now, the discussions on the realigning some of the budget of DepEd was raised in the Senate Committee on Basic Education hearing But I'm not sure if that is already final, because a lot of the senators there were really one in saying that what funds education, the education sector needs, will have to be given.
Mhm.
In fact, when we say single billing, single payment for vouchers, some senators are even saying, magkano ba talaga yan? Para mangyari na yan.
Mhm.
Because, of course, we say education as an essential activity. But other than that, no, sabi ko nga, nagkaroon ng mga programa na magbibigay ng ayuda, pero ang tagal mabigay ng ayuda kasi paggawa pa lang ng implementing guidelines, matagal na. Ito kasi may mga implementing guidelines na eh. May disbursement system na. So pag ito, binigyan nyo ng pondo, mabilis ang ano niya, ang relief.
Erap, have you heard of anything like that with your interaction with IATF or from other authorities?
Well, it's safe to say that during the first ECQ, when the emergency powers was passed, the law on emergency powers was passed, all of the non-health budgets were targeted to be realigned. Safe to say, because of course the first priority was on the health. But other than that, I don't think the money was touched. No? Because during the next the next wave of concerns were already on the critical sectors, which included education. And for budget for TSS, kasi that's included for budget for GASTPE. So it can't be touched because there are the students who are qualified under ESC. They are guaranteed. They have to be funded until they complete the entire program. The government cannot stop in the middle of their studies. So it's still there. Don't worry.
Okay. Let me read another question here. This one from Hernan Herrerita. The question is, the design of senior high school originally is to provide higher subsidy for TVL programs to help schools maintain their investment for laboratory. But at present academic, TVL, sports, etc., all have the same subsidy. I'm not sure if if the question is clear. Do you guys want to comment on that?
Yeah, ano yan eh, matagal ng mga discussions din yan about the voucher amounts, no? Meaning they should not be the same across tracks and strands. We can, because right now, the only tiering that you're doing is location of the school and whether the student is public or private, right? Pero yan pwede pang aralin. Nung unang sinasabi namin yan, on the second year of implementation, again, babalik tayo sa administratively burdensome. Diba? Kasi madaling sabihin, pero pag sa implementation, baka mahirap. And of course, the research will have to back us up when we make that kind of a recommendation. But we completely agree that in the future, we can look at that. No? Those programs which are more expensive will have to have higher voucher amounts, right? In fact, sabi ko, priority programs of government. Dapat yan, mas malaki ang voucher amount. So to incentivize students to move to this area, such as STEM, for example. So lahat yan pwedeng pag-usapan. Pero ngayon kasi, 16, 17, 17, 18, 18, 19, nasa pang-apat na taon pa lang tayo ng implementation ng voucher program. At marami pa tayong nililinis sa kanya. Ang isa na talagang gusto nating mangyari ay TSS para sa senior high school teachers. Diba? So, hindi naman kasi namin one time, big time, no? Ang mga gusto nating mangyari, kaya iniisa-isa natin, no? Ang proposal, especially if it means additional funding.
And on top of that, I've heard from a lot of private schools that the amount or the value of the vouchers is not even sufficient to cover the cost of operations in private schools. In fact, a lot of private institutions had to offer a top-up on the voucher. Is that something that's being lobbied as well? Has there been any movement on the guideposts there, given all of the priorities?
Correct, Klink. In fact, we submitted that. It's a costing senior high school study that we did. And at the end of that entire costing study, we recommended voucher values for 2020-21. We're saying for NCR, this should be as high as 28,000 for public, 22,400 for private. For highly urbanized, 24,500 for public, 19,600. We had figures, no? And we can reiterate this. But as you can see, it's not as if the funds are limitless, right? But
right.
This has been there. In fact, we actually thought that we will push for this very aggressively in 2020-21. But COVID happened. So because COVID happened, so how did we want to think of our priorities? So we went back to, what about teachers? Teacher salaries, teacher salary subsidy for senior high. Baka ito muna. Instead of increasing the voucher amounts. Baka more ESC grantees at the upper grade levels muna before increasing voucher amounts. See? So, but all of these studies have been given to legislators. Specifically, Senator Gatchalian has this, Congressman Romulo has this. We also gave this to DepEd, because in fact, when we had the increases in ESC, this came out of a study that was done by. When we went up to 18,000 for teacher salary subsidy, this came from a study that was also. So we did this, costing senior high school. It's a very good study that we did, and we will push aggressively for this when the dust settles on 2020-21.
Right.
I just want to add to that. The increase in the subsidy for senior high is just one of the area in building the entire ecosystem in the delivery of senior high. Now, when this was all being considered, when it was being initially rolled out, the government said that it needs the government sector because it cannot afford entirely to absorb all of the senior high school students of the public school system. So it's just part of it, the funding, the vouchers. But also included is the intended partnership and complementarity with the public with the private schools, so that the DepEd, for example, instead of building more classrooms, opening up more schools, they'll just let the private schools accept the students in the senior high using the vouchers. So kasama yon. So I think we have to be consistent with that intention of the law and the implementation of the senior high, because now it has also become a problem. A lot of the public schools have started to accept their own senior high school, unduly competing with the private sector in certain places. They're crowding out certain localities. Merong SUCs still offering senior high, merong pang DepEd schools, minsan magkakatapat na yan with the private schools. So I think this has also, there should be a mapping of the existing schools, kasi dapat lang yan whether it's in public or private, it should be under one system. They should not be competing with the government.
Siguro dagdag ko lang, kaya dun sa position paper na pinirmahan ng APSCO, ACU, the PAC National, Regional, and some regional associations such as NDA, DAC, CVAPS, BACS. Ang sabi natin, we create a comprehensive education roadmap. Kasi, paano ba talaga? Diba? Kasi hindi ito palaging tug of war. Now, where does the student go? How much? Because for example, ESG, do we increase the amount of the subsidy or do we increase the number of grantees? Now, that's a question that should be part of an overall framework, right? Of how we want to deal with junior high school. At the elementary level, do you think we should also have ESG? But what parameters should we have in order for that to happen? For the voucher program, kanina sabi ko, 95% ng estudyante natin sa private senior high schools are already voucher recipients. So are these the numbers that we really want? Okay, at the same time, when public schools provide senior high school, do we also think in terms of who provides what? In terms of tracks and strands? So what we're saying is a comprehensive education roadmap. Okay, so that we know how to locate both the public and private schools in the education landscape. And that will also always, operate using the principle of complementarity.
Right. I'd like to ask you some follow-ups on that, but let me get to some questions. There's another question here from Lolita Iniego. Good morning. My grandson came from grade 7 in public. Now he has enrolled in a private school as grade 8. My question is if he can avail for the ESC this school year as grade 8 in the private school.
Sorry, I did not hear that. What is it again?
Okay, so the grandson of Lolita came from grade 7 from a public school. Now he has enrolled in a private school as grade 8. The question is, can he avail of the ESC in grade 8?
Yeah, that's what we were proposing. No, but still a proposal. It's a special provision only for this year to allow ESC participating schools to accept ESC grantees at the higher levels, 8, 9, and 10. Okay, kasi di ba, what drove that parent to move the child? Probably because the private school is ready to implement the curriculum even with all of these constraints. So yun ang proposal natin yan.
A question here from the chairman of PAPSCO, very motherly figure for Attorney Estrada here. I think you may know what she's talking about. He says it's not true. We were paid last week of May, credited by Land Bank first week of June. Erap, you want to take this on?
Yep, payment for the TSS.
I think she's referring probably to TSS.
Maybe probably Doris can answer.
What's the problem with
that they were not paid though. We were paid last week of May, credited by Land Bank's first week of June.
There's also Land Bank is also on skeletal workforce. Okay, when I ask about this, that's one. But we've had the same. We've heard the same comments from other schools that DepEd says that they already have downloaded the funds, and then when they check with Land Bank, they receive the information, or they find out 3 days after. This is something that we can discuss with Land Bank.
I'm not sure. Maybe you guys will understand this question. This comes from Perpetuans Mauban. The question is, how about non-ESC? Kailan po kaya magbukas ang OVAP?
Sana this week. In the next few days, we hope we can open for non-ESC grade 10.
Next question. A lot of questions here about ESC and TSS, but this one from Bernadette Temena Beroy. Hi, sir. Please ask for ESC payment for batch 12 NCR. That's the question.
They've not received their ESC?
I think that's the implication of the question, yes.
Okay. You can, we have numbers on our website of the monitoring and the processing unit. You can direct it there so that they can assist you. Actually, we have pinned in our PAC Facebook, okay, all the phone numbers of all our units, so that you can communicate with them regarding your concerns.
Okay. I'm sorry I'm not able to read all of the questions. There are just so many, but here's one from Angie Atenta. What about principals who don't have teaching load yet working for the certification or recertification of ESC participating schools? Are they thought of? Salaries of principals are not subsidized, and yet qualifications is much similar to that of public schools.
Yeah. Attorney Estrada, we will need principals.
I guess for the admin, is this for admin personnel as well?
Yeah, but they're also teachers. I would imagine that are they ranked? Well, are they considered different from teachers in the sense that in some schools it's an honorarium that is received, but they're actually tenured faculty. And if they're teaching 180 minutes, they're still eligible for teacher salary subsidy for ESC schools.
And this one's for Attorney Estrada. Can HEI instructors also receive an equivalent TSS received by their counterpart in junior high school in the proposed amendments of UNIFAF?
Well, that may be considered in the future. A counterpart subsidy to faculty in higher education institutions. We're also looking into that. That's a possibility also.
This one from Rowena de la Cruz. is TSS for PRC licensed teachers only.
Yes.
How about teachers with specialized field employed in senior high school teaching specialized subjects with TESDA, national certificates, and instructors with license in their specialized fields, such as in maritime and aviation? Are they also entitled to TSS?
Actually, the TSA for senior high school, it is a proposal and it's being discussed, but yes, that's correct. No, they could be, say, licensed. I know of a school where the teachers are licensed accountants, so they're CPA. So I think that already takes the equivalent, no, of teacher license, so from PRC for education. So that can be all part of the thinking, because senior high is different, no, compared to junior high, because there are practitioners, no, who are teaching in senior high school. So that's part of the discussion. But definitely there has to be a license, no, which is the equivalent in TSS for ESC, that they are professionals and that they're eligible to teach in that particular field.
Again, more on TSS. This one from Josefina Bulaom. How about the possibility of including the elementary school teachers in a TSS? They too are teachers, and in fact, that's even more tedious to teach the elementary students. Without elementary teachers, they cannot move to higher level learning.
Erap, you want to answer?
That's actually included in the Arise bill that was approved at the House before it adjourned. It will actually expand to elementary, but only, I think they're looking at a fixed subsidy. But outside of the expansion of the teacher salary subsidy under GASTPE, I mentioned in my lecture earlier about pushing for a bill, the Teachers Compensation Act, which actually subsidizes the salary of the private school teachers. Now, the difference between their salary and the salary of the public school teachers, the state will fund that gap. And this includes elementary all the way up to senior high. I think it will also be expanded to faculty in higher education eventually. But that is the spirit of that bill. And we're pushing for that. No? It's in parallel with the efforts to expand the current GASTPE law. But there's an independent push for that bill. I just want to share, Klink. Sorry if I this is already not covered by the question. But when we're pushing for the teacher salary subsidy of Teachers Compensation Act, it was actually filed in 2018. Kaya lang kinulang yung oras. 17th Congress, kinulang na ng oras. And in this 18th Congress, wala pang nag-file. No? There was an attempt to refile a version of that bill in this 18th Congress. But unfortunately, an office in Congress at the House of Representatives reviewed the bill, the same bill that was filed in 2018. And it was ruled out that it cannot be filed. And surprisingly, for offending the state separation with the church. Ang layo, no? Why? Because they're saying that if the state will fund a portion of the salary of teachers, some of the teachers may be in Catholic schools. No? So I just cannot accept that, that especially now, a lot of the bills are passed. Sorry to say, may mga legislators, for example, passed making the crucifix optional in hospitals, for example. How are these bills, types of these bills passed? No, these are actually more offensive to non-establishment of religion. But I cannot accept that the argument that the state cannot fund salaries of teachers simply because they may be teaching in religious, especially Catholic schools. So I hope, especially my friends at the CAP, if baka hindi ninyo alam yung development na yan, because I also like to share that in the last year's National Convention of the CAP, the Assembly pushed for the filing of the bill. The entire Assembly pushed for the filing of the bill. I just don't know if they're updated with what happened to that bill. It was not filed because, again, an office in Congress said that this cannot be filed. Otherwise, it will offend the principle of separation of church and state. But we will not stop with that link, whether it's through CAP and other, and COCOPEA and other. Even in my individual capacity, I will always push for that conversation to include the private school teachers in any government support to all licensed teachers.
Well, what's your reading of the political landscape, Edap? Because the Congress will reconvene for a very short time before, just before the SONA, and then you have, of course, all of the priorities related to COVID and economic recovery, and then you have ABS-CBN and other issues, cluttering the agenda of the House. What's your feedback from the senators and congressmen? How open are they to these initiatives?
I'm very happy that every time I present to Senate and Congress on the state of private education, everyone agrees. Everyone is sympathetic to our situation. They acknowledge that education, especially private education, is one of the critically affected sectors, and that it needs urgent economic and policy intervention of the state through the passage of all of these laws. Unfortunately, I think overwhelmed din yung ating legislature with a lot of requests and policy requests from different sectors, hindi lang education. But I'm happy that the private education is being recognized. In fact, I think by NEDA, they ranked it number 2 ang education. Unfortunately, with the economically affected, number 2 ang education, and then number 4 sa number of jobs lost, during the pandemic. So I think by force of circumstances and because of our legislators also concerned for our sector, I think it will really do good if we will be included in these special sessions before the Congress resumes or reopens in July.
Yeah, and maybe both you and Doris can talk about the urgency of these initiatives. I think Doris mentioned earlier that besides the obvious distress that private institutions are facing, which is being shared by every business now in the private sector, that generally there are companies now who will not be reopening because of all of these difficulties. What about private schools? I think some of you mentioned that there may be private schools just on the brink, really, of bankruptcy because of the situation. How vast or how serious is that problem now?
We had this survey of member private schools with the COCOPEA. So around 500 of them around April during the first ECQ. And based on the survey, if there will be no forthcoming economic intervention from the government and the school opening will be delayed further, then a lot of the schools are considering closing down by end of August. That's because their resources would no longer be able to sustain the payroll. And in the meantime, they cannot open yet. So it's really a problem. But that's an issue, laying off, closing down. But I think for education, it's beyond that. There's a bigger issue, national issue on the economic and social impact. But of course, we cannot let also our school personnel, especially the teachers, lose their jobs. They have to be assisted by our government. Baka lumipat sila ng ibang careers, lalong mahirapan tayo. We need the teachers. Especially if we want to rebuild our country from this pandemic, we need also the teachers.
Yeah, not to diminish the importance of restaurants, but other restaurants to go to. But if a school closes, particularly in some areas, there's very little alternative for the learners in that area. Is that a correct observation? Huh?
Yeah, that's why we're saying if the private schools are not able to sustain themselves, then it's not as if you can close today and open, the next year. It's not as simple as that, because for you to deliver quality education, you should have a stable faculty, you should have stable programs, and it takes a lot of planning and a lot of upskilling and reskilling to be able to navigate the changes in 2020-21. That's why we're doing a survey, because we get bits and pieces of information, like one school will close for 1 year and just reopen next year. They're
Mhm.
asking if they'll be eligible to be ESC participating. But so far in the survey, what we're saying is that more than 2,000 of the 3,300 schools are saying that they're opening. So if
Mhm.
we get all of them to submit to us their school opening, then we will have a very clear handle as to which schools are decided to close this year and which ones are continuing. But I think majority are continuing. But what is
Mhm.
really needed, when in April there was uncertainty, what was needed was an announcement of when the school year will start. And when that was announced that it's August 24, I think the school started, so now they know that by August
Mhm.
24 we can open. Therefore, you'll have to ride the storm, or it's not a storm, it's a desert, right? There's very little funds, no, for June and July. But they know that in August, when they open, there'll be tuition payments, there'll be GASTPE. So if there's clarity in the school opening, then that already alleviates, no, a lot of the anxiety. But then you hear, some party list group saying, i-cancel yung school year. Yan talaga. Pag yan ang nangyari, talagang buong buo yung sektor. Paano na?
Mhm.
The public school teachers have have certainty about their salaries. What about
Mhm.
private schools, right? So,
Mhm.
so when the school opening was announced, it brought some stability, for the schools, in the sense that they know what to do, how to proceed. When the curriculum was released, again they knew what to do, and
Mhm.
all the discussions about what they should submit and the flexible learning options allows them to plan 2020-21. But what is hanging over their heads now, and I keep on asking Attorney Estrada about this, is what if the president, if the law is passed, that the president can move the opening past August. So what will happen to the schools, the private schools, which already have started enrollment, and some are opening as early as July, while majority are in August.
Klink, I just want to add,
Yeah.
we're talking about school opening and we're talking about the economic and social impact, but we all agree that the number one consideration is, of course, the health and safety of our students. That's why I think now there should be included in the study surveys, probably for the IATF and to our policymakers. We should also include the epidemiological studies, no? So that we can also simulate if ever we reopen, for example, on a limited scale. Let's simulate what will be the transmission, for example. No? Will there be a risk of transmission? Because we all speculate, but there's no conclusive study on this. So might as well look at that, or we wait for the vaccine, which may not happen very soon. But at least if we do a study and we reopen and we put in place certain health protocols, so that we can also see what's the risk, and is the government willing to take that risk, and will the schools and the parents also would take that risk, no? So that we can get a clear scenario. Because we cannot just wait for something to happen and that we all go back to normal. So it's important that the studies on the transmission, on the health side, should also be made.
Thank you. In the interest of time, running out of time, let me, there are many more questions, but let me just ask two. So this one is from Salvacion Dorado. Can PAYAC release the names of the schools that will close based on your study or COCOPEA's study?
When we have the data, no, because right now, so far the schools have been reporting, that they will open for next year, and we need to know that, no, because they have grantees. That's why we need to know whether they are offering junior high or senior high in 2020-21 when we have the data.
Yeah, for the for the schools, I have some interaction with those schools who are really planning to close already, laying out the process in the closing. But this cannot be announced publicly ahead of until such time that they have run out of means, they have exhausted everything, and then they're closing. Then they'll have to file it with the Department of Education, with CHED. But making that announcement in advance, that's very sensitive, no? Because or saying we are at the brink of closing, it will also put a scare. But so I think they're really trying their best, no, to make do with whatever means that they have right now to continue the operation of the schools. But it's a reality. I'm telling you, I am receiving a lot of requests for help, not to reopen, but what to do with their personnel, with their students, because they are now starting and they're initiating the process of closing down. Very unfortunate.
Yeah, this is very painful for a lot of people. A lot of our viewers, I asked this, but one of them was Philip James, and it has to do with whether or not the people participating here will receive digital certificates for participation.
It's I think
is there a way to do that? How we can document attendance?
Yeah, it's really something that this is also a learning experience, I think, for the organizers, because unlike in a physical seminar or lecture, you control the environment. You have I think this will balloon to even at least a maximum of 100,000 in one of your webinars. So it's really a problem how you send out certificates, including e-certificates. This is a problem for us. Putting signatures there or putting their names is also a problem. So we just the short answer is we decided not to send out certificates, because what is more important is the knowledge that you gain from these virtual webinars. Or
maybe Eric, you can text the certificates. Doris, you want to say something?
Oh, no, yeah, I was asking Eric about that because I was also being asked. And, my answer really is, I think it's really not the certificate that matters to us, right? We all consider you who were listening in and who are with us now as education advocates. So this is education advocacy. That's why we're giving you this data, we're giving you this information, we're giving you some what's happening right now so that you can move forward with education advocacy, because this cannot be the work of a handful. And you should be privy to this issue so that when you talk to your own stakeholders, your parents, your teachers, they will really understand where we're all coming from. Because definitely, see, if the school closes, it's really not just the owner who gets compromised. It's the entire community. And I'm really unhappy when there's like a divide between owners and teachers, the admin and the faculty. This is a school community we're talking about, right? It's not as if we're not together, such that when the school is not able to operate, we're all affected adversely, and the entire community is affected. So I don't buy that admin versus teachers, teachers versus students is a school community. I always call it an educational community. Therefore, when we talk to each other in this community, then might as well have all of this information, coming from the different groups that are working with government in this advocacy work.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Doris, Era, for your presentations and your questions. There are so many more questions, but unfortunately, we do have a limited time, but maybe we can end with some final words, well wishes perhaps, or outlooks. The subject matter is a little bit bleak, maybe some words of encouragement. Let's start with you, Arab, since we started the questions earlier with Doris. Your final words. Your microphone.
Sorry. I just would like to take this opportunity to, of course, appeal again on behalf of our school personnel and our students for the needed economic intervention from our government. Yun na lang po muna siguro. We've been working for this very hard, and we hope that in the next wave of support, whatever social amelioration packages or stimulus package that will be given, we hope that the school personnel and the students and the parents and families affected will also get the same. Thank you very much, and maraming salamat po to those who participated today.
Doris?
Wala na akong masabi kundi salamat sa inyong lahat. Salamat, Erap. Well, we wanted to do this. And of course, we brought in Klink. Klink should be speaking, not just moderating. Next, we'll make him speak. Okay, but again, bawal humapagod ngayong mga panahon na to. We're doing this not for ourselves. So I think that's the thing that actually allows us to get things going despite the difficulties. Kasi hindi naman to para sa atin talaga. Para ito sa mga estudyante, para sa education sector, para sa ating bansa. Kaya bawal talagang mapagod ngayong mga panahon na to. We just have to get the work done because the cost is too high. No? If we fail in not continuing with education and the learning, despite the constraints amidst COVID-19.
Well, again, thank you, everyone, and thank you to all our viewers. Again, I regret not having the time to read everyone's questions, but they are recorded there on the PAYAC Facebook page, and I'm sure Doris' staff will get to those issues later on. Thank you, everyone, and a pleasant good morning to you all. Thank you.